I wanted to go back to page 7, the top of page 7, because Sri Aurobindo is telling us here about the earth. And then the fourth line, after he tells us that the earth needs this sap of pleasure and tears, and that it has rejected this rapture's boon. And it has offered to the daughter of infinity her passion flower. And note here that he hyphenates passion flower, of love and doom she gave. So I promise you I would give you the symbolism of the passion flower. And the Christian one is quite long, but I'll try to keep it short. They define each thing, the three top sigmas that are the three nails that were nailed into Christ's hands and his feet. The five anthers are the sacred wounds, the two hands, the 2 feet, and the head. The rays are the divine glory, and the central pillar is the column where he was flogged, and the tendrils are the cords and whips used in the scourging. In India, it's very different. It's from the Mahabharata. There are about 100 blue petals, one for each of the Kauravas. 5 of the yellow ones in the center are for each of the Pandavas. The green bulb in the center symbolizes Draupadi, the queen of Pandava. The 3 filaments are for the Holy Trinity, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. And the radial in the center is the Sudarshan chakra of Lord Krishna. And so when Amal was writing out for Sri Aurobindo the text, he thought it was passive flower. And Sri Aurobindo writes, good heavens, how did Gandhi come in there? Passion flower, sir, passion, not passive. Hopefully I haven't offended anyone. Okay, so I see this as a passion flower, not exactly the flower that we know it as, but a flower of love and doom that is given to Savitri. And now we can begin with hard is it. Hard is it to persuade earth nature's change. Mortality bears ill the Eternal's touch. It fears the pure divine intolerance of that assault of ether and of fire. It murmurs at its sorrowless happiness, almost with hate, repels the light it brings. It trembles at its naked power of truth and the might and sweetness of its absolute voice. This is very powerful, very poignant, because the change of earth nature and the humanity involved is very slow and very difficult. We see that every day. We see it in the false news. We see it in the wars. We see it in the power lust of leaders, the need for dominance of others. It is very difficult to persuade this change in the earth nature because mortality cannot bear the Eternal's touch. He says it bears ill the Eternal's touch. And it fears this pure divine intolerance Because when the divine force comes down, it is intolerant. It can wipe you out. It can change you. I know of one man who left Mother and Sri Aurobindo and became an Orthodox Jew. You tell me how that's possible? I don't know. But it happens. They turn away. And it's an assault of ether and of fire. We murmur at this sorrowless happiness because we like to eat our bread with tears. It's a famous Christian thing in the West. And I don't imagine it's different in many countries because sorrow is a spicy food. It murmurs at its sorrowless happiness, almost with hate. Powerful line, repels the light it brings. So we see here that it fears, it murmurs, it trembles at its naked power of truth and the might and sweetness of its absolute voice. For me, that absolute voice is the divine word. And I know that in Christianity, there are many, many sects that say you cannot change a word in the Bible. There are religions who say that the Pope is infallible when he speaks on these matters. I cannot accept any of those. But what we can accept, I believe, is that when Mother has spoken to us, or Sri Aurobindo, it was an absolute truth. It was the eternal's touch. And it was this naked power of truth. And with it comes the might and sweetness of its absolute voice. Any questions or comments? It's quite clear, isn't it? Would someone else like to read?
Could I read?
Surely.
Inflicting on the heights the abysm's law, it sullies with its mire heaven's messengers. Its thorns of fallen nature are the defense. It turns against the Savior hands of grace. It meets the sons of God with death and pain.
Well, very, very poignant and very sad that this should be the human condition. That it inflicts on the heights the laws of the abysm. It even sullies with its mud, with its mire, heaven's messengers. Its thorns, notice how he's using thorns here. He's not going to use in the next lines exactly a Christian picture, but very close. Its thorns of fallen nature are the defense it turns against the Savior hands of grace. And it meets the sons of God with death and pain. And now this marvelous and difficult passage that we have to read. Anyone can read it. Would you like to continue?
Sure. A glory of lightnings traversing the earth scene, their sun thoughts fading, darkened by ignorant minds, their work betrayed, their good to evil turned, the cross, their payment for the crown they gave. Only they leave behind a splendid name.
So the glory of lightnings traversing, going back and forth across the scene, the earth scene, is the avatarhood of all those who came to uplift humanity from its darkness to light. But their sun thoughts are fading because they are darkened by these ignorant minds. Even their work is betrayed, and their good is turned to evil. And the cross is their payment for the crown they gave. Only they leave behind a splendid name. Now, Sri Aurobindo tells us that a fire has come and touched men's hearts and gone. A few have caught flame and risen to greater life. So those two lines are almost the opposite of everything we've read, because now he begins to talk of Savitri again. She is too unlike this world, too unlike the world she came to help and save. Her greatness weighed upon its ignorant breast, and from its dire chasms welled a dire return, a portion of its sorrow, struggle, fall. And Sri Aurobindo says that we have been through everything and much more than humans. And he says at one point, and Mother, 10 times that she has had to bear. So those few of us who have caught flame and have risen or are rising to greater life, we have felt that fire that has touched our hearts. He says it's gone, but it's only at this point in the symbol dawn that it's gone, because it comes back in much greater force later on in Savitri. But Savitri is so perfect. We know that no suitor could claim her hand in that palace because she was too perfect. And we will see passages where Sri Aurobindo talks about all these different people who came to claim her hand, and some wanted her just for themselves, and others were envious of her, and others were actually angry with her. And so she had to go out into the world and find her beloved answering soul, Satyavan. And so her greatness weighs upon this ignorant breast of earth and man. And from its dim chasms, welled up, a dire return, a portion of its struggle, sorrow, struggle, fall. And so we see, especially in Sri Aurobindo's letters and in Mother's agenda, how much they have had to suffer. Even in poetry, Sri Aurobindo says that my early poetry was nowhere near what it should have been. And Savitri I have had to recast many, many times until it was as close to a perfect perfection as it could be. Any questions on this whole passage? Or any comments, please? And then we should carry on a little bit. Yes.
Yeah, this resistance which we have between us, who are the divine beings, the sparks of the divine, which Mother came to save. She came to save here us as souls. And this resistance of our lower nature is constant topic where you can find it in the Veda. There's always this fire and the armies which assail us, which are embattled there against us. So we have these armies of darkness which do not want us to proceed, to grow in consciousness. So we are half divine and half beast and God, yes, demigod and the beast within one body. So we have both in us. That's why it's so difficult for us to, even when we caught the flame, it's so difficult to get out of this, how to say, settlement, or this kind of what we already got as habitual way of being. Yes? Because we found some harmonies there which we could sustain. We know them already, how they work. We know their laws. We already kind of accustomed to their ways of being. And here there is an absolute truth coming to us, absolute bliss, which we are not accustomed to. We want it, of course, but we do not know how to step out, how to leave that other foot from that ground and to step totally into this light, how to plunge into the light. We do not dare because we are not totally sure what will happen to us. This is a constant, ongoing process within ourselves every day, every second, to choose where to be and how to be.
Very, very true. In fact, when we go deeply into the yoga, Mother says something very, very interesting. She says that if you tried to take up each problem individually, it would never end. She said you cannot do it like that. In fact, the only way that it can be done is to surrender everything to her. And then she lifts it like an outworn garment that we're wearing. And she frees us from it. I have had the experience myself many times of things that I thought in myself in this life would be impossible to change. Many. Some are still there, of course. Many are still there. But how many she has lifted, just in that sense of consecration and offering and trust in the Divine Mother. It could not be done any other way. So Savitri has to accept this portion of our sorrow, struggle, and fall. To live with grief, to confront death on her road. The mortal's lot became the immortal's share. Thus trapped in the gin of earthly destinies, awaiting her ordeal's hour abode, outcast from her inborn felicity, accepting life's obscure terrestrial robe, hiding herself even from those she loved, the Godhead, greater by a human fate. I remember once that Aurobindo Basu gave a talk called, based on one line of Savitri, "A God come down and greater by the fall." And here Sri Aurobindo is saying that early on. The Godhead greater by a human fate. But there are many things here that we have to look at very carefully because the mother had to confront death. She had to confront death for the transformation. And so her share, she took on, as the immortal, she took on the mortal's lot. Now, this line, thus trapped in the gin of earthly destinies. A gin is, in England, it's a man trap. They used to dig a hole and cover it carefully and to catch men, probably robbers or something like that. But it's a man trap. So we are trapped in this gin of earthly destinies, and Savitri is trapped there. And she abides awaiting her ordeal's hour. And that ordeal's hour is when death takes Satyavan. It's heart-wrenching when you read those passages much later on. So she is outcast from her inborn felicity, and she has to accept life's obscure terrestrial robe. She even has to hide herself, even from those she loved. And we've talked about this before, that Mother told us, and told Huta specifically, that she could not show herself as she was. So then one day Huta tells me, I said to Mother, "Are you really the Divine Mother?" And Mother said, "Come tomorrow." And she came to Mother every day. And when she walked in the room, she saw the Divine Mother from the waist up, and she couldn't even speak. She could hardly tell me. She was, this is the aftermath of this experience, and she could hardly speak of it. I've had my own experiences with Mother and Sri Aurobindo to confirm this. So they have to hide themselves, even from those she loved. Therefore, the Godhead becomes greater by the human fate. And I guess we all know how Sri Aurobindo has spoken so often to his disciples that he had to take birth in human form because they would not have understood anything otherwise. They would have been clueless if he came in the divine form or partially divine form. Of course, many vibhutis have come, and we know of so many of them. And they have helped us, and we could understand them because they did not come in the full divine form. So Mother has to come like that, her Godhead becoming greater by this human fate. Would you like to go on a little more? Maybe, Nilisha, you could read a little?
Okay, I can read.
Yeah.
A dark foreknowledge separated her from all of whom she was the star and stay, too great to impart the peril and the pain. In her torn depths she kept the grief to come.
Well, in her torn depths, now he's flashing us back to the story of when Satyavan leaves. And she had to keep the grief inside of her. And in that beautiful passage where she's back with Satyavan, and she's doing the common things of earthly life. She's tending to the fire, she's sweeping the house. She doesn't show anything to his parents. She's just the good wife of Satyavan. She keeps in her torn depths the grief to come. That grief, of course, will come when death comes and takes him. But now, Sri Aurobindo even calls her a miser, counting out the last days until Satyavan will be taken. So we see here that this dark foreknowledge is the foreknowledge of death's coming and taking Satyavan, and how she will have to battle for his soul. So it separated her from everyone whom she was the star and stay. The star and stays, it's very beautiful because it tells us that she was so great that even to her parents and to everyone in the palace, and even when she went to be with Satyavan, she was the base of everything. They referred everything to her. She was their star. And she's too great to impart that peril and the pain. So she has to keep in her torn depths the grief to come. And Ashwini, could you read a little?
As one who, watching over men left blind, takes up the load of an unwitting race, harboring a foe whom with her heart she must feed, unknown her act, unknown the doom she faced, unhelped she must foresee and dread and dare.
Really speaks of our mother, doesn't it? She watches over us, even though we're blind. And she takes up the load of an unwitting race because we don't know anything really. The little realizations that we've had, the small progresses that we have made are nothing to where we have to go, what we have to become and finally to be. And so she has to harbor this foe, who is death. And she has to feed him with her heart. Because at this point, she's not fully aware that she's the Divine Mother. And that death is a part of her also. And in the end, he simply dissolves in her light. But now she has to go through this. They don't know what her act is. They don't know the doom that she's facing. And she's unhelped because no one can help her. And she has to foresee alone and dread and dare. And then he tells us, long foreknown and fatal morn was here, bringing a noon that seemed like every noon. For nature walks upon her mighty way, unheeding when she breaks a soul, a life. Leaving her slain behind, she travels on. Man only marks, and God's all-seeing eyes. Well, we know that the fatal morning comes, and at noon, Satyavan leaves his body. and his head is in her lap. So that morn brought a noon that seemed like every noon, because the sun was shining, the birds were singing, everything was beautiful. Because nature walks upon her mighty way, unheeding when she breaks a soul, a life. Now that's a very powerful thing for us to understand, because nature is evolving towards the supermind. And it doesn't matter to her how long it takes. She can break a soul, she can break a life, she can trample over everything, she can destroy continents and lands. She can do whatever she wants, because she's nature. No, don't forget here, he capitalizes the N of nature. For nature walks upon her mighty way, unheeding. She doesn't heed about breaking a soul or a life, and she leaves her slain behind and travels on. We can see the damage that nature does, what we consider as damage in her progress of evolution. But only we mark it. But God sees everything, because God is also involved completely in nature. It's very, very powerful, because this long foreknown and fatal morn, she first found out about when Narad came to the palace and told her that in 12 months, Satyavan would die. She has had to carry this fatal morning with her all this time. And she's unhelped. Mother said when we asked her about Oroville, she said nothing depended on us. Nothing depended on us. Everything was part of the divine plan. And then we begin to realize, why are we here if nothing depends on her, on us? Well, I think the answer has to be that we can help in the evolution, or we can slow it down. So there is some effect of humanity, a major effect, and that is why they came as the dual avatar, to try to change this earthly life to life divine. Any questions or comments? So we'll go on just a few more lines. Even in this moment of her soul's despair, in its grim rendezvous with death and fear, no cry broke from her lips, no call for aid. She told the secret of her woe to none. Calm was her face, and courage kept her mute. Yet only her outward self suffered and strove. Even her humanity was half divine. Her spirit opened to the spirit in all. Her nature felt all nature as its own. Apart, living within, all lives she bore. Aloof, she carried in herself the world. Her dread was one with the great cosmic dread. Her strength was founded on the cosmic mights. The universal mother's love was hers. Now, this is when Sri Aurobindo first tells us that Savitri's love and Savitri herself is the universal mother. But she has to go through all of these experiences of humanity. And so she does this in this grim rendezvous with death and fear, in this moment of her soul's despair. And she does it without any cry breaking from her lips. She doesn't ask anyone for help. She doesn't even tell the secret of her woe to anyone, because calm was her face and courage kept her mute. But, and this is the key, yet only her outward self suffered and strove. Even her humanity was half divine. Her spirit opened to the spirit in all. Her nature felt all nature as its own. When we would stand beneath the samadhi and listen to mother's cries of pain, we would feel so bad. But it was her physical body beginning to become transformed. And she would tell us that just on one side to the left would be pain, and just a little bit to the other side would be absolute peace and unequaled joy and love. She was treading that razor's edge for us. Her cries were for us. Because her strength was founded on the cosmic mights, and the universal mother's love was hers. Those of us, whether we have met Mother in the physical body or not, doesn't mean anything. We can feel her love, and we do feel her love. So many have come long after 1973. It's been, 47 years since she left her physical body. And for me, her force is more powerful now than it was then, except that we did have her protection very, very concretely, very physically, when we worked in Oroville at the Matrimandir. You could feel it. But even then, one girl died falling through the structure. And that was meant to be. Mother said it was the consciousness of the people. It often comes down to that. It's happened with the service tree more times than I can tell you. That limbs were broken, and it was the consciousness of the people that created those severe breaks. And yet the service tree, which she gave me to care for the rest of my life, which was able to do it for 37 years until it was taken from me, it has recovered from every break. And if you look at it now, it's so beautiful. In the last huge break of the top of the tree, when No one else really in the ashram could do this repair. I spoke to Manoj Dasgupta and asked him if I could bring a professional team from Oroville who were trained in tree surgery. And we all worked together. And at the end, saved the tree. Lowered huge logs like that to the ground. And at the very end, Kumud sent someone to me and gave me the flowers of divine love and 2 blessing packets, which I put into the deep cut of the tree to remain there and bless it. She is with us, and she will never leave us, because the Universal Mother's love was hers. Namaste all. Thank you for joining us.